Thank you so much for creating time to speak to us. So, as a woman in the industry, you're at a position where you can see who's been secluded, who's not been secluded, and what needs to be fit around, right? And we want to understand that finance is a huge part of it. But help us understand the ecosystem as is the agriculture ecosystem from outside looking in.
Well, the ecosystem in Africa is very fragmented at the moment. And specifically from a gender perspective, you have women who are smallholder producers, very few women input providers around fertilizer and seeds, and then very few women around logistics, mechanization, and then when you take it across the value chain, very few female aggregators. That's why you have middlemen and not middle women, and then very few female processors. Then you see women again at the retail, when in the informal markets, women are selling fresh fruits or vegetables. And so at both spectrums, they're very low margin activities, both at the primary production level and at the informal retail level. And so what we haven't seen is women moving up the value chain from primary production to retail. And we want to see that happen. Now, for that to happen, you need not only access to markets, access to knowledge, access to financing. But I've put them in those three levels. I don't think financing is the first thing that women need. Access to markets, access to knowledge and skills, and then access to financing. And the challenge, as you know, is that many of our value chains are so fragmented, especially in West Africa, that even finding groups of women and clusters of women to work together to increase their purchasing power, their agency, their voice, is often difficult because so many work in isolation on 1 hectare of land on average.
Right. Another part of the ecosystem that is fragmented is the bodies that are now overseeing this. We have IFAD, we have AGRA, we have AGRF. All these conversations that are happening almost at the same time concurrently, but we need them to have a common solution, and that's not always been the case, even for the last couple of decades. How do we get to a point where we're speaking now on the same page?
Well, I share your frustrations. We definitely need more cohesion. I was at the African Development Bank earlier this year, where all these groups have now come together to say, you know what, we need to align, we need to have a master plan for regions, and our master plans have to be coordinated across the board so that we can ensure that we're leveraging resources, the limited human interest and credibility, addressing the same problems with the same vision in mind. So it's starting, it's bubbling up. For us on the ground, there's often frustration because you talk to different actors and they don't seem to be working together, but I'm happy to see that at the higher levels, there's now some interest and coordination around this.
In terms of leveraging investments, how deliberate are you that you're catering to this demographic and this demographic whenever you're trying to map out who to give the cash to?
So, as you had asked, women are often excluded in the financial services sector. We operate across the board. Through Sahel Consulting, we're working with rural women, rural female dairy farmers. Right. And in that case, we're very deliberate about saying we're going to ensure that they have financial literacy and link them to a whole range of digital tools and microfinance institutions. Through Sahel Capital, we're actually offering private equity, which is for medium to large companies because the average investment size is $3 to $5 million. So that's another spectrum. And in that case, there's definitely a shortage of women who are running those medium to large scale agribusinesses or even SMEs. And there's a huge gap in between the $5, $10, $20,000 and the $500,000 mark. And there are not enough players bridging the gap to ensure that entrepreneurs can scale. And that's where I feel there's a huge gap. And we need more players to enter the spectrum. And sadly, we don't see that happening enough because it's difficult to serve when you're doing micro, small, and medium businesses, and when you're offering them financing. It's the same amount of due diligence required, the same amount of support, etc. So many players are like, it doesn't make financial sense. And that's where digital tools can come in, hopefully to reduce the cost of providing financing in that mezzanine or middle level.
All right. We'd like to understand, as my final point, when we talk about these digital solutions, we talk about the huge drones that can help with irrigation, and we talk about even something as tiny as a phone to 2 farmers or something like that. So the range of digital tools we can afford to people are wide. For the smaller businessmen that want to get into this ecosystem, where are the opportunities, the easy opportunities?
The sad thing is that there are no easy opportunities in agriculture. There are no easy opportunities. Because if you want to build a sustainable business model, you have to be able to make a business case. Who's going to pay for it? Is it the farmer? Is it the banker? Is it who in the ecosystem will pay for those digital tools? And that's what many players are struggling with. I think a big gap that still exists is data. And so the ability to collect data across the value chain is still a low-hanging fruit. Is it easy? It's not easy. Something as basic as market prices, knowing what the price of rice is across Nigeria on every given day. That data is valuable, right? But who's collecting consistently and who's willing to pay for it? And so we have to figure out those business models that work and how to incentivize the actors in the value chain to value that data and how to ensure that those entrepreneurs who are coming to provide that data and collect that data can build sustainable models because they're filling a gap. And that's the big challenge. With every digital tool I'm looking at is what's the business case and how can we ensure that across the value chain, donors are not propping up a few companies to provide drones or provide this, but that on the ground, they're filling a need and people value it and are willing to pay for it.